Hi guys, happy Tuesday. How are you? Hope you're having a wonderful day. As you can tell, I have a fine sheen of sweat over me because it's getting warm outside. So hi, happy Tuesday. Good to see you. Glad you're here. Because it's Tuesday, I'm going live again, and today I'm talking about the psychology of certain words and psychology tips you can use when it comes to writing your content. Because once again, when we are writing content for our businesses, whether that's for your website or a social media post or whatever it is you're writing, you're not just trying to fill like a void. It's not just like you're not just filling a bag. You're trying to be strategic. You have a purpose. You're trying to connect with people, get them to move forward in your sales cycle, to purchase from you, to like you and trust you more. You have a purpose. So, one of the things that copywriters have known for a long time is that psychology is really important to writing convincing copy. And there is tons of research and easy things that you can add to your copy, or basically just have a checklist on things you can add or do. I always go through, I have like a folder on my computer, which basically it just says best practices. And it's best practices for this, it's psychology, it's emails, because it really is just kind of like you're kind of making a recipe. So here's some of the psychological ingredients that would go like in the recipe of like effective content. Okay. All right. So I'm going to start with specifically words and phrases, stuff that you should say and why you should say them. So I'm going to start a little bit with grammar. So I'm sure you guys have heard this before, but this is an important one. Use active words instead of passive words. So in case it's unclear what that means, you want what you say to be active. You don't want to say the car was driven to the hospital. That's passive. The car was driven. Okay, who's doing the action? The car didn't, so who's the noun is missing. So what you want to do is I drove the car to the hospital. It's active. Here's one of the reasons why it's important. Passive sentences, the car was driven to the hospital, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 words. Like I said, that one's 7 too. Passive sentences are usually longer, they're more complex. So it's harder to understand. When something is longer, when it's harder to understand, it's usually less convincing. People are going to tune out more. So keep your sentences shorter by making them active. Don't let the car be driven, drive the car. It's usually a shorter sentence. Another thing that goes along with it is when you have a chance to use a verb or an adjective, or God forbid, adverbs. If you're a word nerd like me, you've been told all your life, don't use adverbs. Anyways, choose verbs. Make very active copy. Um, so there's everything I'm sharing with you. Like I've found research for it. There is a reason for it. So this comes from Harvard. They did a research on admission letters that led to students being, admitted into Harvard. Verbs in admission letters um, had a higher chance of getting the student into the university. You want your content to have verbs, to be active, to have that power. It's more persuasive. Um, so here's a really good comparison from this article I found it in. Adjectives are kind of wishy washy, verbs are much more crisp and powerful. So here's adjectives. I know this guy Brian. He's intelligent, hardworking, and really insightful. You're not going to remember that. That kind of washes away. Someone opened a thesaurus and pulled out a few adjectives, right? And you don't remember it. Now, think of this same guy Brian, same guy, same accomplishments, but with verbs. Now, what if I told you that Brian founded a successful company, created a popular blog, and leads a talented team? He founded, he created, he led. That's much more memorable. It also adds in a story element, which I'll get into over and over again later. Pick verbs. If you have a choice between listing adjectives and using verbs, be active, use verbs. All right, now I'm going to get into some specific words. Once again, these are easy. Hi, Dee. Good morning. Happy to see you too. Happy Tuesday. All right, so here's a good word to add to your copy, and it's the word because. This is actually a really interesting study that I've come across before. Just using the word because in your copy ratchets it up to a next level of being compelling. It's just a really interesting study where someone walks up to a line at the copier and they tested 3 different phrases. The first phrase was, Excuse me, I have 5 pages. Can I use the machine because I'm in a rush? Okay, valid point. Number 2, excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine? So again, asking to cut in line, same, 5 pages. May I use the machine? And then the third one that they tried out, excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the machine because I have to make copies? So once again, there's a difference. Number 1 and 3 both use the word because, but at number 1, because I'm in a rush, that's a more valid reason. The third one, it says, because I have to make copies. Well, why would you let someone like that to ditch in front of you? But just that little word because has this massive effect. When people said because I'm in a rush, 94% of the time, people said, yeah, go ahead, jump in front of me, it's fine. And number 3, when they said, because I have to make copies, there's no big, there's no rush there. 93% allowed them to pass, allowed them to cut in line. And number 2, when they didn't say the word because, only 60%. You got maybe a 50-50 chance. Just by using the word because, it brought this extra 30% up. Isn't that crazy? So when you're using your copy, make sure to just find a way to use the word because. We're very compelled by that word, so use it. It's powerful. Throw it in there. Because you have savings, because your life will be better, because. Now I sound like Tigger from Winnie the Pooh. Anyways, another good word to use, instantly. Especially in our culture right now, we want things yesterday. Once again, this is all brain related. So when they do MRI studies, when we feel like we're going to get an immediate reward, we got things lighting up. We want problems to be solved quickly. So use that to your advantage. If you're able to give something quickly, immediately, do it, because we want those rewards now. So use the word instantly for extra power. Okay, now this one may sound funky. I actually was talking through like a tagline with some bookkeepers yesterday, trying to figure out how to get the wording exactly right. She included the word your, and she wasn't quite sure because it made it kind of long. However, you is the pronoun you need to use the most. It's one of the most present words when it comes into viral headlines. And you want to use the pronoun you. Now, if you're using emails and stuff like that, first name is better. It's not really an option, of course, when it comes to social media posts or your website. Use the pronoun you. Don't say we, don't say them, don't say I. Your copy is not about you. It's about how you make their lives better. So use you. Keep the focus on the reader. Throw you into your content. Here's another one that seems a little counterintuitive. Remind people that they're free to walk away. They're free to not take the deal. You're free to do whatever you want. There's been research on this too. Even though it feels like, I know when you're in a business and you're trying to convince someone to buy from you, you feel like you have to kind of trick them into doing it and pushing them into doing it, but that's not the case. The idea is to be persuasive and put it out there, but not force them into it. No one wants to be forced into it. Remind them of that, and that actually bumps your conversion rates, sometimes by double. So here's the finding that was interesting. At Western Illinois University, they conducted an analysis examining 42 different studies on this phrase, but you are free, with more than 22,000 participants, and the findings were dramatic. If you use the phrase, but you are free, like free to walk away, free to not do this, it doubled, times 2. It doubled the success rate for people replying as hoped. Isn't that crazy? When you just remind people, you have a choice. I'm not forcing you into this. Doubles your rate. So keep that in mind. Say, but you are free to, whatever. Just try to include it. Here's another one that's important. Okay, so I don't know if you have this feeling when you read a book or something like that, but when we're trying to absorb new information and you're reading think of a long email or a long article, whatever it is, you're more likely to remember the beginning and the very end. And the middle gets a little bit fuzzy sometimes, but you can use that to your advantage. What you can do is put a PS at the end of your email, your offer, your social media post, because people will see that and remember that. So fundraising organizations in particular, they've been using this tactic for years. And one copywriter who's been doing that tactic, he says that 79% of donors and prospects, when they open the piece of mail, they read the PS first. That's what jumps out to them. So use that to your advantage. Make sure that you don't just trail off at the end. Use it, because people are going to read here and here. So make sure that you make these things count. They're important. All right, so those are the words to use. And there was some psychology in there, but this is more getting into the psychology of the messaging. Once again, none of this is hard stuff. It's all stuff that you can just kind of have on a checklist to double check if you're putting things up or you're making something that's, longer or more important and really need to juice it up. Anyways, so here's some psychology that you can add to your copy. Now, it's got a fancy name. It's called illusory truth. Now, that sounds fancy, but basically all it means is repeat yourself. So this is something that I say to my boyfriend sometimes when we're teasing each other and he's trying to convince me that something ridiculous is real. And I tell him, just because you repeat it doesn't make it true. Well, that's true. But what's funny is that when you repeat something, it makes it appear more trustworthy. There's tons of research on this. If you repeat the offer, repeat the fact over and over again, people are more likely to believe it if it's been repeated. So this is called illusory truth. So once again, think about like when you're driving. It's just like you're not thinking of like put your foot on brake, put your foot on gas, put your foot on brake, put your foot on gas, turn the signal, turn the... Your brain has gotten so used to it, it kind of has this like shortcut. You're almost like hypnotic when you're driving. You don't even pay attention to that stuff because your brain has this shortcut to deal with it, so it's not taking up all this extra energy. So you have that with your decision-making processes. In order to like save your brain from overworking, you are listening for the things that get repeated, and then as a shortcut, your brain is like, well, I keep hearing it, so it must be true, right? So basically, keep repeating yourself, keep posting on social media, keep showing up, keep sharing your offer, keep putting your ideas out there. If you keep repeating it, people will trust it more. It's just part of how our brains work. Like for example, there's this, and then Dale Carnegie, he said, tell the audience what you're going to say it, then tell them what you said. So make sure that you repeat your statements. Even when I write short social media posts, especially like in the membership I have for my bookkeepers right now, I will, a lot of times for the engagement ones, I'll ask a question at the top where it's just like, what have you done this weekend? I'll tell a story about what I've done. And at the end, I'll ask the question again because I want them to engage. I want them to remember. So repeat yourself. Use illusory truth if you want to feel real fancy. Another one is use questions. They're persuasive. Even when they're rhetorical, even when it's like one-sided and you're putting them into your copy, use questions. Think about it, how your brain engages with a rhetorical question versus like a statement. So for example, say I say something like, our product will make you build habits easily. Great. I don't care. I'm not going to remember this. But if you replace that with a question, do you ever feel like your habits are out of your control? It leaves this open end. It engages me to think, and it connects to my real life. I don't care that you have a product that builds habits easily, but when you're engaging me in the conversation this way, even on a written page where I can't have a normal two-way conversation, it matters. It brings my brain in. It makes me remember it better and engage with you more. So in that same sense of like remembering things, when you are telling stories, describing your product, try and use sensory and textured words. Think of how something smells. Think of the colors it is. Think of what it feels like, the temperature, things of that thing. When you get those senses engaged, you're more likely to remember it. So for example, there's studies showing that when someone asks if you had a rough day, rough is a texture, right? That's more memorable than a bad one. Bad isn't really sensory. It's more abstract. You want it to be sensory. So think of words in the five senses. This one was really interesting to me. There's this thing called mirror neurons. Again, this is just full of information to make you sound very smart in conversation at your next cocktail party. So mirror neurons, this is something that they think is related to like our empathy with other human beings. So for example, you're watching a game and someone gets hit really hard in the chest and you can hear a bone crack. And you're just like, oh, and you can like basically feel it yourself. That's this empathy. That's this like mirror neuron thing going on where you can almost feel it yourself. it doesn't just happen when you observe it yourself, though. If you have writing that like can paint the picture with those five senses words and make someone feel it, it makes it much more of an emotional connection, which is something I'll get into more as well when we talk about story. So, for example, with beer, if you're selling beer, and if you are, great, it sounds like a great life. Um, Invoke memories of good times with friends, the ice cold beer and the condensation in your hand. Get the senses going if you can. Now, for a lot of my clients are bookkeepers, that's okay. But try and get into the sensory of what their life will look like with the ease of your bookkeeping. Focus on the benefits they'll enjoy, like the time in the backyard on the grass with their family under, with a cool lemonade or something. Bring the senses in, makes it more emotional, more engaging. Um, this is a funny one, but if you can and it works, make something rhyme. There's a reason why little kids' songs, rhyme. It helps us with memory. And also, think about O.J. Simpson's trial. If the gloves do not fit, you must acquit. Everyone knows that one, right? And because it was said simply and it rhymed, there's studies showing that made it more trustworthy, and it was repeated. All of these things that were very cleverly done, rhyming was a part of it. Once again, this is part of your brain doing shortcuts for you. The brain readily processes rhyming words and phrases, and it sometimes makes us view them as more truthful or accurate. So it makes you look a little funny sometimes if you use it a little too weird. But once again, we like simple things. If something is simple, it appears more trustworthy to us. And if you give something in a short rhyme, you sound very trustworthy and it's easy to remember, right? This also probably feels counterintuitive. I really like this one as well. So maybe you've been dealing with like some concerns, or you want to make sure people feel safer about your product. I actually did this a little bit in a recent post where I talked about fears people may have about signing up for my membership, and I addressed them head on. You play devil's advocate. So apparently that's something from the Catholic Church. Like, they would have someone as an anti-character witness when someone was supposed to be canonized into sainthood. But if you do that for your own product, arguments framed in that devil's advocate style, they're more likely to persuade listeners to support rather than be against the argument. Oh, hi, Anita, how are you? So instead of avoiding the problem, you're addressing them head on. So instead of trying, you never want to paint yourself as infallible, as completely perfect. Everyone can smell a rat. Nothing is completely perfect, and that's okay. Just be straightforward and talk about it. Go through a list of their concerns. That's exactly what I did. Some people might be afraid they're going to get locked into the membership. No, you don't get locked into it. Some people may be afraid that they will spend money and not get value from it. No, you got a 30-day money back guarantee. So when it comes to those sticking points where people might not be signing up for you for whatever reason, address them head on, and it actually makes them trust you more and more likely to work with you. So I talked about this earlier, but once again, if something is easily said, easily understood, we're more likely to believe it, whether or not it's true or not. So once again, if you want to have this cocktail party term, cognitive fluency. So the easier it is for us to comprehend something, the more inclined we are to believe it. So, for example, the O.J. Simpson, if the gloves do not fit, you must not acquit. It rhymes, it's simple, it's clear. That's gotta be true. And when you aren't direct, when you're unclear, your brain kind of sends up red flags. It's just like, if this were true, it would make sense, and this isn't making sense. And it's just a communication issue. So don't, and part of this comes into how you write. So you don't want to pretend like, don't act like you have to throw the whole thesaurus into your website. You don't need, like 18 syllable adjectives. You don't need to go crazy with your grammar and long, eloquent sentences. You really don't. Write in a way that a middle schooler would understand what you're doing and what you're offering. It's actually pretty normal, like reading level when it comes to a standard, because you want to be clear. To be clear is more persuasive. And if you use a bunch of fancy words and long sentences, you're going to lose them. It's not going to be persuasive. The idea is to write persuasive copy, not to show that you have a thesaurus. So focus on that being the goal. Let me see. Yeah, Princeton University did a study on it, and it basically said your customers want easy. Easy's believable, and believable prompts your customer to take action. So keep it simple. Don't feel like you have to go crazy with this stuff. Just be clear, explain it in a way that a middle schooler would understand. Other just like random tips that are kind of writing, kind of psychology. Be specific, be concrete. You know, if you say a few hundred, that's not nearly as good as saying 457. We like specific. It makes it sound more real, right? Use numbers. Once again, that's part of the concrete thing, and it comes in like bulleted lists, things of that nature. Odd numbers are better than even. That's a whole other thing. Another tip with numbers when it comes to, like, say 90% of people like something, it's easier for the brain to think in terms of number of people versus percentages. So instead of 90%, say 9 out of 10 people. It's more visual. Once again, visual. You want people to visualize what you're doing. Think of the senses. Lists are always a good thing. List of 3 things is always satisfying. I write in list of 3 all the time for my clients in the membership. If you're using names, or if you're using like emails, include names. So I said that the word you is very powerful, very helpful. But if you're using emails, make sure you add the name. And if even on social media, even if you just have to say you and people start commenting, comment back and use their name every time. Names are powerful. Use them. They're really easy. And then stories and metaphors. So once again, this kind of goes back to what I was telling you about being able to visualize things, contextualize things, feel it, taste it, smell it. And let me give you just an example really quick about being specific with that. So for example, this is a good sum up. People can block out sales pitches, but everyone loves listening to stories. So if you're coming at me with a commercial, like, I can just tune you out immediately. But if you start telling a story, I'm gonna listen. So you really want to try and tell specific stories about a single person to draw them in. Okay, so here's another example. Again, you don't just want to like make a statement with adjectives. So here's another example. Our safe room against burglars has helped out thousands of people feel secure and safe. Okay, I don't feel anything from this. I don't care. I'm gonna forget this. But if they tell a story about a single person, they might. John was sleeping one night at home with his wife and his infant. Suddenly he heard a noise from the kitchen. He immediately woke his wife up, ran to the kid's bedroom. They locked themselves in the safe room where they called the police, and the police came within 5 minutes and apprehended the burglars. See, that's very different. When you share that story of an individual, look at all the sensory stuff in there. He ran, he heard a noise, immediately woke his wife up. It's all of these feeling words, all the sensory words. Makes it much more specific. It's much more active, like I said earlier, using verbs instead of the adjective of our safe room has helped thousands. I don't care. But John interests me. This is an interesting story about John. Let me see. And stories have a way of getting in under the radar. People almost don't notice that they're getting something promoted to them if you tell them a good story about it. Just be detailed. Use metaphors if you need to. Think of like Animal Farm. Once again, you're giving something clear and emotional and telling a story. It doesn't have to be like a true life story. If you need to, use a metaphor. Use communist animals on a farm if you have to. It'll definitely set you apart. Sorry, I'm really hot right now, so my brain's probably a little fried. Yeah, use stories. Use stories because it's visual, it's active, it's specific, it's all of these things I just told you about. But yeah, once again, none of these things are hard to include in your copy, and even if you just are able to add a few things, it will make a difference. It'll be a good habit. It'll snowball over time, I promise. They're not hard to do. It's just adding ingredients. So that's what I have for you today. If you have any more questions about this or other tips you would want for spicing things up and making things more effective from a psychological or writing style standpoint, just send me a message. I'll do what I can to help you out, and if you need something written and don't want to spend the time doing it yourself, I got your back. I will help you out. You just let me know. All right, guys, have a wonderful Tuesday, and I will talk to you guys next week. Bye.